Hi, folks. We like to be in charge and making our own decisions. As we get older, we even get set in our ways. But as Christians, we need to always be willing to listen to the Lord. Today, we're going to look at a passage that we're all very familiar with, uh, and rightly so. People in this focus in this passage on Jesus and his message and what he does here. But today we're going to look at the servants in this passage as well and see if we can learn something from their role in this experience. First and foremost, we must discuss the role of a servant. In the New Testament, the word in the NIV is servant, but it actually means slave. It refers to someone who was owned or controlled by someone else. Slaves sometimes performed menial household tasks, and unlike other folks, they weren't just hired for something. They were actually owned by a certain person. Some of them were called stewards when they were put in charge of the other lesser servants and even managed their master's finances. Um, some slaves because some were slaves because their parents were slaves when they were born. Uh, and then the others were captured in war and then forced into slavery because of that. And some folks had previously struggled when they were free to make ends meet. And so they actually sold themselves into slavery and actually had a better life as slaves than they would have before. Slaves of rich masters had all kind of opportunities they would never have on their own. Um, Slaves had no freedom, and their owners could do with them whatever they wanted, including selling them to someone else. With this in mind, let's look at this passage and the servant. And today, the message is entitled, Whatever He Says. John chapter 2, beginning with verse 1. On the third day, a wedding took place in Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to them, "They have no wine." But that would have been a terrible embarrassment to the host family. And see, this wedding ceremony went on for like 5 days, and here it was in the third day of the wedding, and they were already out of wine. It would have been an embarrassment to that host family that was there, and they probably would have been looked down on and probably criticized by the whole community for their poor planning and also that they'd neglected their social responsibilities to the guests. So it was a big deal. And Jesus replies in verse 4, "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus is like, "Well, what have I got to do with this? I'm not part of the wedding party. I'm just a guest." And Jesus replied, "My time is not yet come." And verse 5 says, "His mother said to the servants, 'Do whatever he tells you.'" And so the first thing that we see here is that we should listen to him. Listen to him. They had a new master now, at least for the moment. And so what would he tell them? They were waiting for his instructions. And they would they listen to him? I mean, he really technically wasn't their master. And Jesus' mother uh, was not their master either, but she had instructed them to listen to Jesus. Now, this was not out of the norm for them because they were used to listening to their master. John chapter 10, verses 27 and 28 says, "My sheep listen to my voice. I know them, and they follow me. I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish. No one will snatch them out of my hand." And so the very first important thing that we can learn from this passage is that we need to learn to listen to Jesus. And we need to keep our spiritual ears on. We need to keep our physical ears on. We need to be open to what the Holy Spirit says as well. We need to listen to him. And going on in verse 6, nearby stood 6 stone jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. And Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And so the second point we see here is do what he says. Not just listen, but do what he says. He tells us a lot of things in his word, in our prayer time, and through the Holy Spirit. The key is to do what he says. And with the servants here, it was probably at this point a little easy for them. Okay, we were used to filling jars with water. That's not a big deal. And here's what happened: is the person that's in charge of the festivities here. There was a certain person that was his responsibility was the wine, and to make sure that nobody got drunk in the wedding feast, because that was prohibited to get drunk. And so this certain person was supposed to watch over the wine. And what happened is, as the festivities went on, he would start to add more and more water to the wine and water it down, and finally toward the end it was 2 parts water to 1 part wine. So this person, it was actually his responsibility, probably part of his responsibility to look at the wine, but it was also probably a little bit his fault that they had run out because he wasn't watching carefully. But Jesus had told them, fill the jars with water, and so they did what he said. The key is in James chapter 1, verses 22 and 24, it says, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. We hear a lot of things, but do we actually do what it says? And it says, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in the mirror, and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. Can you imagine that? Looking in the mirror and walking away and going, oh, what did I look like? That's what happens. And when we don't listen to his word and do what it says, and put it into practice, then we often forget about his word. Application helps us to understand his word. So do what he says. Do what he says. So back to verse 7, and it says, so they filled them to the brim. Okay? They filled all the way up. They could have half filled them up, could have made a feeble attempt at it, but they filled them all the way up. And so the third point here is be all in. Be all in. If you're going to do something for the Lord, do it to the max. Be all in on it. Do it with all your heart. Mark chapter 12, verses 28 through 30 says, one of the teachers of the law came to him and heard them debating. Noticing that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked them, of all the commandments, which is the most important? And the most important, answered Jesus, is, hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your soul, and with all your mind, and with all your strength. In other words, be all in, right? Give it your all, and give him your best. Proverbs chapter 3, verses 9 through 10 says, honor the Lord with your wealth, with the first fruits of all your crops. Then your barns will be filled to overflowing, and the vats will brim over with new wine. And so give him your best. Give him your first efforts. Always put him first in your life. Be all in, and things will go well for you, it says. Verse 8, and then he told them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet. Now this is the guy that was in charge of the wine. This master of the banquet. And so now he's starting to kind of test their faith a little bit in what's going on here and see if they're going to obey. So the servants had to make a choice here, and it sounded a little crazy. So let me get this straight, Jesus. You want me to take just straight up water to the master of the banquet and give it to him as if it were wine? And they're thinking, man, he's going to go off on me. This is not going to go well. Which brings us to point 4. Don't ask don't question his methods. Don't question his methods. Jesus works in ways that are far beyond anything that we can comprehend. You can probably look back to a time in the past where God had talked to you and asked you to do something, and you thought, "Well, I don't know about that. That's a little different." So, don't question his methods. Isaiah chapter 55 verse 8 says, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord." And so sometimes he may ask you to do something that you just can't wrap your head around, that you don't know why he wants to do it. But folks, we need to trust him. We need to not question his methods, and we need to be all in about it. Again, listen to him, be all in, and don't question his methods. And then verse 8 and 9, it says, "They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into the wine." Wow, can you imagine that? With one of the servants, you're like, "Wow, that happened right under my hands when I did that. That whole thing right then." Now imagine this. What happened? Scientists said, and what happened is you have water and you have wine, and basically at the atomic level they are entirely different. So Jesus actually rearranged the atoms inside the molecules to make water into wine. And so the next thing we need to do is realize and acknowledge his miraculous power. Realize and acknowledge his miraculous power. Revelation chapter 15 verse 3 said, "Great and marvelous are your deeds, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are your ways." Luke chapter 18 verse 27, Jesus replied, "What is impossible with man is possible with God." If you have a situation in your life that you're going through that you can't see a way out, Jesus can overcome that. God can speak and make things happen. Luke chapter 9, Jesus sends out the 12 disciples. Beginning with verse 1, it says, "When Jesus called the 12 together, he gave them power and authority to drive out demons and to cure diseases." He gave them power and authority to drive out demons and to cure diseases. And he sent them out to proclaim the kingdom of God and to heal the sick. Now, he has power. He told them, "Take nothing for your journey, no staff, no bag, no bread, no money, no extra shirt. Rely on me completely. Trust me. And whenever you stay at a house, stay there until you leave that town. If people do not welcome you, leave the town and shake the dust off your feet as a testimony against them." And it says, "So they set out and went out village to village, proclaiming the good news and healing people everywhere." You don't think he has power? He passed it on to the disciples, and it says they went proclaiming the good news and healing people everywhere. Recognize and acknowledge his power. Back to verses 9 through 11, it says, he did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Can you imagine that? They were like, "Oh yeah, if only he knew that was just water when we poured it. Wow, now it's wine." And he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." He basically said, at this point, this should really be some watered down stuff. And here, this is better than you had at the start. Not only does Jesus perform miracles, he brings the best to us. And it says this the first of his miraculous signs Jesus performed in Cana. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. Faith. That's the last point. Have faith. Jesus says in Matthew 22, verses 21 and 22, truly I tell you, if you have faith and do not doubt, not only can you do what was done to the fig tree, but you also can say to the mountain, go and throw yourself into the sea, and it will be done. If you believe, you will receive whatever you ask in prayer. Folks, if you have a servant's heart, if you trust God, if you listen to Jesus, to his voice, things will go oh so much better for you. We need to, like we talked about before, not center everything on us, not put us first, but put him first. That's what servants do. They are always there at the bidding of the master, and whatever the master says, they do. Have you wandered away from that? Have you got your own self-interest at heart? Have you forgotten how to be a servant? We see in these servants that were used to serving that they listened and did exactly what they were supposed to do. And as a result, they got to participate in a miracle that has been retold over and over again down through the ages. Can you imagine that? Do you think they believed in Jesus after that? I would think so. And so here we are again at the end of today's sermon. Let's look back at what we learned. First of all, listen to him. It's very important to listen. And the Bible talks about being able to hear but not listen. Okay, he who has ears, let him hear, right? That we need to listen, that we need to use our ears, and then sometimes that involves blocking out distractions and being able to listen carefully to what he says. And we do that in prayer, by reading the scriptures, and by listening to his voice. And we also should do what he says. If we listen and never do anything with what we've learned, then there's nothing to be gained by it. We haven't applied it. We need to be able to listen to his word and do the things that his word says. Otherwise, it's just another book. Do what he says. And next, make sure that you're all in. You ever had somebody do something for you and they were half-hearted about it? Matter of fact, they didn't even want to do it at all, and they did it anyway, and they go, oh, okay, I'll do it, but I won't be happy about it and stuff. How did that make you feel? Did that make you feel important? Did that make you feel like that person really wanted to do that? Absolutely not. Yet as Christians, a lot of times we're that way. We do stuff, but we do it begrudgingly or half-heartedly, and we're not all in. So make sure that when God tells you something to do, that you do it with all your heart, and you put him first. Next, make sure that you don't question his methods. And when God tells you something, and it sounds crazy, it's because you're looking at it from an earthly standpoint. He has heavenly powers and can perform miracles. And if he says he's going to do something, trust Him and don't question His methods. Which ties into, we need to realize and acknowledge His miraculous powers. God created this whole world that's around us. We were created out of mere dust. Jesus took water and rearranged the molecules to make wine. He can take your life that feels like it's just at rock bottom, that everything's going wrong, and He can perform a miracle with you. Which brings us to the one key factor in all this: have faith. If we don't have faith, we don't have Jesus. You, by faith, accepted Jesus into your heart. How many times in the Scripture did Jesus say, "O ye of little faith"? he probably shook his head when he said it. Again, folks, where's your faith? Where's your faith? Have faith. Trust God. Have the heart of a servant. Folks, these are trying times. But if we listen to God's Word, if we do what it says, and we trust Him, and we're all in about it, our lives will change for the better and for eternity. I miss you all. I love you all. Stay safe, and God bless.